Well, good afternoon and welcome to another episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. If you like our content, we encourage you to click like, share with like-minded friends, and subscribe to the channel. There's so much content that we have for you, and there's so much more to come. Today, we continue our series on cities of the New Testament, and we feature kind of a subcategory we call Archaeologist Interviews. Today, we bring you part 2 of a 3-part interview with Dr. Thomas McCollough, lead director for the Khirbet Qana excavations. And we believe that Khirbet Qana is the leading candidate for the ancient biblical city of Cana in Galilee, where the miracle of the water to wine took place. In part 1 that we released last week, Dr. McCollough spoke of how he became interested in archaeology in the Holy Land in general and excavations in Khirbet Qana in particular. Today, we pick up the conversation in which he gives us more detail on that cave complex that they discovered and what was inside that cave that was so telling. Of most importance is what was found inside that cave that gives us a glimpse into past Christian history. What did Khirbet Qana mean to early Christian pilgrimage? Does it give us any confidence that Khirbet Qana is in fact biblical Cana in Galilee? These and many other fascinating questions are answered in this part 2 of the 3-part episode. So, here we go.
So many questions. As you've discussed your interest in archaeology in the Holy Land. Just yesterday, I was rereading the story of Nathanael and recalling that Jesus said he saw him under a fig tree.
Yes.
Which it just went ding.
Yeah.
This cave complex was found around a fig tree. Now I know there are
Yes,
many
indeed.
fig trees in Israel,
Yeah.
but it had special significance while I was preparing this episode.
Yeah.
Can you take us through, and you've done some of this already, how many people actually went into the cave, explored, looked around? I have some dimensions. You mentioned 8 feet high at the center and so forth, but I'm most interested in the story of the shelf or the altar with 1 or 2 stone jars and space for 4 more. Can you talk about that a little?
Sure. Once we saw the opening, and it was filled. As you looked into the opening, you can imagine a kind of arched opening, and about halfway up in that arch there was soil. So clearly, it was a lot of fill soil. It took us a season and maybe a little longer, 4 or 5 week seasons to empty that cave. Once we had emptied it, it was clearly a natural cave that had been expanded and manipulated, if you will, and to make it habitable by those who would enter in. Steps leading down from the entry and so on, plastered on the inside.
Yeah.
And then we saw this was still standing, this upturned sarcophagus lid. We were pretty certain it was a sarcophagus lid because we found the sarcophagus down the hill, missing its lid.
Oh, okay.
And so they had upturned this sarcophagus lid. I initially, when I was writing about, called it an altar. I'd have to put altar in scare quotes there because it's not an altar as one would normally. That is, the surface of it would only be the width of the stone itself. So if you're going to put hands, elbows, lean on it, it would be a relatively narrow surface. But it does clearly enclose space. It is a space marker. So as you approach it, you know you're approaching space that is distinctive and sacred because and they do chisel these crosses on the face of that upturn. So it's clearly signaling to the pilgrim this is a space that is sacred.
Right.
And then behind that space there is this carved shelf carved into the bedrock of the cave.
Hmm.
So it's an intentional shelf, and in the shelf, receptacles were made for jars. We know that because we found a jar in situ, not the full one, but it was still there, up about 50, 60 centimeters. So you could make it was clearly a jar. And then the holes there for the rest of the of what I think fairly presume the rest of the jars.
Right.
So you have then, as anyone would enter into the cave, you have them almost immediately then facing this upturned, cross chiseled altar with quotes, behind which were then a shelf, and into that shelf were placed these jars.
Right.
How the ritual was enacted, we have some of the recollections of the as you probably know from the pilgrims, particularly the Pilgrim Piacenza, which sounds like they're doing a full reenacting of a kind of a meal that would have accompanied a Roman feast or wedding.
Right.
He says he reclines on a bench, like Romans would have done. So our guess, this is pure speculation because we haven't emptied the other caves. The reason we didn't do that is because, and it has happened in our cave that we emptied, is that as soon as you empty those caves, you get looters. And if you don't empty it completely, get every bit of data you can get in one season, invariably there's going to be damage looting. We've done everything we can. We put up an iron gate. We've done everything we can.
Right.
But because it's not in a national park and it's very remote, it's just very vulnerable. So that's why we stopped.
Sure.
You can see where they're connected. We can establish that. So we're presuming there's a kind of processional ritual. One thing in this room, another thing in this room, third thing in this room, and then exit. And all of that, I think, is accessible through the back of a chapel that where you would enter, then a kind of framed entryway into the cave complex.
Right.
That would have been enfolded into the larger sacred structure, the chapel, and then a small monastery attached.
Well, my next question was going to be, I think you've answered it. Do you intend to return to excavate the other three sections of the cave?
Yes. It may not be me.
Right.
I'm putting in place men and women to follow me.
Right.
But yes, those will be excavated. And if you run across somebody who's looking for a dissertation topic, someone will excavate eventually the monastery and the chapel. We can see walls, we can see arches of windows, that they're breaking the surface of the ground, so that it's there.
Wow.
So that will be a consequential excavation. There are choices to be made because the synagogue needs to be finished as well. There's an enormous amount of interest, and you're not asking about this, but in the domestic quarter that we excavated because we have identified 3 different kinds of housing, from very modest without their own courtyards. They're using kind of like a gamla, where houses are built into the inside of the hill, and they use the courtyard, the roof of the house in front of them as their courtyard. So very modest. To houses that are larger, they're on the much more gradual slope on the northern slope. And we excavated a domestic structure there that had its own courtyard and had a mikveh in the courtyard. So we take that to be the step up in terms of economic ability. And then we excavated near the large public building, which is identified as synagogue on the Acropolis of the hill, a very large house, 16 meters by 8 meters, with a stone courtyard, plaster on the interior, fresco on the plaster, very much like the house you may know of at Yodfat, which is just that kind of, I mean, I hate to call it a villa, but a Roman style large house.
Right.
So some person of wealth is part of this village come, and we've got gradations, social and economic gradations, and this what it had looked like from the outside as a very simple village. It's a much more complex village. And then you may know we found an abbatiary with Hebrew letters, which introduces into, you know, this village, and I think what forces villages to be approached much more carefully, because here at least is fundamental literacy. So this whole idea of a peasant village where much of that would have been presumed to be absent, that is social economic differentiation, at least some fundamental literacy, and now has to be included in reimagining those spaces. And that's an interesting place to put Jesus, because the whole question with the Lucan text about reading the scrolls always kind of dismissed. Isn't that curious? He clearly could not read. Now it has to be reconsidered.
No.
And, you know, for a very long time, even the idea that Jesus would have encountered a synagogue in a village was dismissed. There were no village, and now we know there are, Magdala, etc. So villages are much more interesting context.
It's, to me, this is where archaeology exposes or actually enlightens us, because, as you know, for decades, people have done various estimates on literacy and ancient
Yeah,
Judea, and it's always tiny numbers, and it still may be tiny numbers.
sure.
But the inkwell found in El Araj
Yeah.
and your abbatiary that you found, to me, as you say, that opens up a lot of interesting possibilities that heretofore would not have been considered, perhaps. So,
And I think the mere presence of first century synagogues, I mean, synagogues are kind of whole point is text. Uh, I don't know that they're, but that's kind of the point. You're reading and studying text, and so I think at least has to be a check on to jump to the conclusion that, and to you know that the term peasant always has that kind of dismissive
right.
tone to it.
Correct me if I'm mistaken, but the synagogue itself underwent a period of change, right? In the
No question.
earliest days, it was more of a communal space. Many different activities could take place there, and at some point, it became exclusively Torah reading, instruction, and prayer. And I'm
And
thinking
the
first century.
synagogue at Khirbet Qana goes through that transition because we can establish definitively when the Bema was built, because we have the plaster where it was built against the outer wall. So we carbon-14 dated the plaster that the Bema had been using as it over against the plaster of the outer wall, and it dates to the 4th century. So adding a Bema is clearly creating a space for a particular use, and that is for text. So I think that signals that transition, you know, from a gathering space for multiple use, I think, to a space
Right.
that's being denoted. This is a space for this use.
Have other archaeologists commented on your work at Khirbet Qana, favorably, unfavorably? Yeah, how does that work? For instance, Scott Stripling went through El Araj about a year ago or so with a pastor and just commented here and there about what he saw, first impressions. And let's just say, with some of the folks involved in that excavation, it didn't seem please them too much. And I don't know, for Jody Magnus, for example, she does not believe that the synagogue under the white limestone synagogue in Capernaum was a synagogue. She identifies it as, actually, I can't remember, some other public space. But has anyone commented on your work, favorably, unfavorably? How do you interact with those?
Yes, they have. I think the primary conversational partner I have is Yardena Alexander. You may know her, and her work at Khirbet Qana, which seems to be. I don't think Khirbet Qana can be seriously, this is my bias, argued into the conversation much anymore. I think the two most viable sites are the one that we have, Khirbet Qana and Khirbet
Okay.
And so she and I have had not hostile, but many conversations
Sure.
about the way in which to weigh the evidence of those. I find in general, and maybe it's because the people I talk to, I found that the evidence that we have assembled, along with the evidence that had come before us. I don't know if you know this name of the Spanish Herojo, Herojo. He was the one who preceded me. He didn't do the material culture, but he assembled this enormous text of all medieval, early Christian, early Roman references to Cana. Everything he could find, and concluded that it is inescapably the conclusion that it's Khirbet Qana. That all the material, all the literary evidence points in that direction. And so that we recovered, and that was before we excavated.
Okay.
That we've recovered the evidence that seems to correlate with the way in which he evaluated the literary evidence has created this sense of, I think you've provided the evidence that makes a compelling case.
Yes.
Again, Khirbet, I think, is also a very viable candidate, and Yardena is just an extraordinary archaeologist, and so her work there has to be taken seriously. But she has nothing in terms of pilgrims. Nobody visited there and said, "Oh, this is Cana."
Right.
She has a thriving early Roman village, no question about that.
I hope this episode has been helpful, encouraging to you, and instructive. I encourage you, again, return to the New Testament, especially the book of John, and read all that John tells you about what Jesus did in and around Cana in Galilee. Our next episode will complete the 3-part interview with Dr. McCollough, so stay tuned for it. It's coming away very soon. Until then, please subscribe to the channel. Stay healthy. Keep curious. Don't be satisfied with consensus opinions just because they are consensus opinions. Do your own research. Come to an informed judgment. Our episodes are full of scholarly books, journal articles, interviews with the principals involved, scholarly papers, videos, and so much more. You'll see that in the description box, and even more detailed on our Substack. We encourage you to subscribe to the Substack, the League of Biblical Enthusiasts. Until then, we'll see you for part 3, coming very soon from the League of Biblical Enthusiasts. I hope this episode has been helpful, encouraging to you, and instructive. I encourage you, again, return to the New Testament, especially the book of John, and read all that John tells you about what Jesus did in and around Cana in Galilee. Our next episode will complete the three-part interview with Dr. McCollough, so stay tuned for it. It's coming your way very soon. Until then, please subscribe to the channel. Stay healthy. Keep curious. Don't be satisfied with consensus opinions just because they are consensus opinions. Do your own research. Come to an informed judgment. Our episodes are full of scholarly books, journal articles, interviews with the principals involved, scholarly papers, videos, and so much more. You'll see that in the description box and even more detailed on our Substack. We encourage you to subscribe to the Substack, the League of Biblical Enthusiasts. Until then, we'll see you for part 3, coming very soon from the League of Biblical Enthusiasts.